I learned from your writing and speeches, Mr. Goldberg, that you are interested in the problems of social entrepreneurship. And I can gladly tell you are on the right place now, because the Global Ethics Institute supports and highlights, in our teaching as well as in the scientific research, the development of new, morally aware companies. Especially the many students who come to us are eager to find new ways of combining the good life with a good business, thus developing the responsibility for both people, planet, and profit. And we really try to encourage that. Be the change you want to see in the world. Everyone can be a change maker and an agent of improvement. From my point of view, that lies in the very center of entrepreneurship. That is why we enable and empower our students to develop new business models. It takes courage to do so and some money. It is not enough to focus on the new business models, new examples of social entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship. We also have to think of the cash flow. What form of investments do we need? How can the financial institutions and markets be used for the new businesses? We can learn a lot from the attempts to raise capital in the field of social venture capital. At the same time, we should examine the traditional financial markets for the abilities to participate. We will find some problems and dilemmata which are well known from the startup scene. Young entrepreneurs have to raise capital through different channels: network investment, banking, equity debt, convertible debt, crowdfunding, etc. But we surely will have to come up with investment and financing ideas we have never thought of before. There is a new landscape of finance laying right in front of us. Who could help us with that? What kind of guide do we need? I think I know one person, and that is why I'm glad to end my little speech to welcome you all again and wish you an inspiring discussion. Thank you.
Jetzt. Thank you, Bernd Willauer. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ute Bechdorf from the German-American Institute, and I'm very happy to be with you here tonight, and I'm glad you came, despite the wonderful weather, despite the soccer, despite everything else that's going on. I think this is a great place to be. Not only in America, the startup culture is growing in Germany too. The Süddeutsche Zeitung just mentioned that the German banks have problems finding the right employees due to the fact that too many young people, at least the economically interested ones, want to found their own businesses. This entrepreneurial spirit is especially strong in the state of baden-württemberg, which, with its historical tradition of the Tüftler, the tinkerer. But I found out also that Baden-Württemberg is, not first in the Republic of Germany, but not last either, in the middle field. And while the overall number of founders in Germany went down during the last year, there's an increase in so-called innovative startups, which means that 95,000 mostly young people have started their own businesses in new fields like biotech or digital industry. The city of Tübingen is a great place to found a business, probably the best for biotech, and the local technology park in cooperation with Reutlingen has an excellent reputation and is more than full these days. And the attendance of our student-oriented workshop this afternoon also proves that Tübingen has and is a lively startup scene. If I myself were looking for an idea, I would probably come up with a center that serves everybody who is looking for information about the US. Language and intercultural knowledge, exchange possibilities and library, music performances, hip-hop workshops and modern dance classes, dialogues with Arabs and get-together with Americans and Latin Americans, Stammtische. Also, I would add fun events for kids, a summer reception for members and a cool photo exhibit once in a while. Perhaps one would also ask for talks about the presidential elections, for lectures about current social and economic developments, like, for example, urban gardening, and for modern and classic literature. And what about youth camps and study tours to Washington? Of course, a center like this exists already, in Tübingen at least, and I would like to invite you to come to the DAI and see what we got. A talk about the phenomenon of Bernie Sanders next Thursday, a presentation about urban gardening next Friday, a nature camp, a dance camp, and a tipi camp for young kids during the summer break. A study tour DC at the end of October, and something really special that connects our cultural enterprise to the topic of tonight. We have a book presentation by one of Tübingen's famous founders. It is Deutschlandreise by Mark Twain, and it's presented by Ingmar Hör from CureVac. So this, if you mark your calendars, it's Wednesday, July 13 at 8 p.m. at the DAI. But now let's get back to the entrepreneurial spirit of today and a different kind of Deutschlandreise. Thank you for coming to Tübingen, Michael Goldberg. It's really great to have you here. We will together tonight kick off the German tour with 6 different places you'll be going to, and afterwards to the Kosovo. So he's a real international person in terms of startup culture. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you to everyone who made this event possible. And if you have friends at home who didn't want to come or didn't get the chance to come, you can tell them we are having a live stream right now. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Gohl. I'm with Global Ethics Institute here, and I'll be facilitating this evening. And let's get straight to the issues that we're going to discuss, and the first speaker, which is going to be Professor Michael Goldberg. Entrepreneurs all over the world solve problems and create value by innovative solutions for products and for distribution. But the success they have does not only depend on the virtue, the individual virtues that they have cultivated in themselves, it also depends on the circumstances, on political, cultural, institutional circumstances of their environment where they set up business. And for example, there is said that the American business culture is more conducive to successful entrepreneurship than the German business culture. And we want to explore some of the commonalities and differences. Is that a myth? You know, is being an entrepreneur the same all over the place, or is it something that we can learn from each other? You know, by having another idea of how a culture might help set up business. Are there different strategies, different mechanisms, different self-images even of entrepreneurs? That is something we want to explore tonight, and I'm glad we have Michael Goldberg with us, whose love and lessons of entrepreneurship have fascinated hundreds of thousands of people, notably students in the MOOC he has set up, the massive online course, that open online course that he set up on entrepreneurship. And he's going to be sharing some lessons and insights with us in the beginning. He will give us about half an hour of talk and introduction on entrepreneurship from an American perspective. And then we will discuss his ideas and our questions and our experiences with 2 of Tübingen's finest entrepreneurs. We have with us Nadine Antic here. I'll introduce you later again. And we have, or will have, Dirk Biskup with us, who's currently attending to some alarm that went off, but he'll be back shortly. In any case, please welcome Michael Goldberg. Before I have you up here, let me talk briefly about you. You're also a professor at Case Western University. That is something that came to you about, I think, in 2012, 2013. Before that, you've been a successful entrepreneur in many different parts of the world. You've worked for AOL. You've also set up businesses and funded businesses and helped people fund businesses and invested in people. And mainly so, my idea of you is basically you are an instigator, an investor in people. And money does play a role in that, but we're happy you're coming to us tonight, and we're curious to share your experiences. Welcome again, Professor Goldberg.
Great, thanks, Christopher. So I think this is working, okay. It's so great to be here. This is the first stop on our, it's like the Rolling Stones tour through Germany. I was in Germany last year at the invitation of the embassy and did, I was Berlin, Dusseldorf, Leipzig, Frankfurt. And yeah, now I get to see this part of the country. It's beautiful. I got to walk through town, and we're here for the weekend. My daughter Kate is here, so we'll be on the river tomorrow, plowing money into the local economy. Thank you, Christopher and Ute, for the nice words. I'll be brief. Even though entrepreneurs, that this is a sprint and you're racing to build your companies and to gain customers, for those of us that are sort of working to build the ecosystem and support this, and it sounds like, you know, the city's been involved in this for a while, the region's been involved in this for a while, the university's been involved in this for a while, we will see the true progress of this work in decades. I mean, it's not, this is not something that you do support over a 2-year period and voila, you've got, you know, a vibrant ecosystem. A couple things I just wanted to mention. You know, the big funder in Ohio from a governmental level was this Third Frontier program. That was done at our regional government level, so our state level. It was a $2.3 billion program that really focused on commercialization activity, and I'll talk to you about some of the specific things that it did. We also had, as I mentioned before, our foundations, our traditional foundations that came together to support economic development for the first time. Again, from a few of the conversations I've had since I've been in Tübingen, it sounds like there is a nice mix of federal, regional, and local programs that are working together with institutions like universities and technology transfer to be supportive. Before we sort of launched our Third Frontier program, we had a number of programs that were kind of small and not coordinated. I think the real thing that really helped us come together was, part of it was the amount of money, and part of it I think was the leadership to bring together the organization. The other thing that I'll mention is that our state programs required a match. So none of the government funding was 100% from government. It required a 50% match from the outside, and I'll talk to you just a bit about how some of that was administered in Cleveland. You know, I talk about intermediary organizations. It's interesting, Dirk and I were talking before about, you know, in the US, there's sort of like 3 categories. There's, you know, essentially, you know, government, sort of public institutions, private corporations, and then what we call non-governmental or NGOs. From what I understand, in Germany, you've got almost sort of a 4th category. You've got, you know, traditional private institutions, traditional public institutions, NGOs, and then this other category, like where you are working now at the city of Tübingen, that might be organized as a private corporation, or my friend from the Techno Park, somewhere back there. The fact that you're organized as sort of, so you're not necessarily an intermediary organization as I lay it out here. This was the big bet that we made in our community, Jumpstart. Interestingly, it's set up as a not-for-profit or non-governmental organization. They have a pool of about $30 million in which they invest into companies. And it sounds actually like there may be something similar here in terms of what you told me, in terms of a program where upon a company exiting, so, you know, and in the venture capital space or angel space, exit is a company being sold or a company doing an IPO, at least those are the good exits. That money that Jumpstart would make would go back into the pot. But underlying, I mean, Jumpstart's made about 40 investments in Cleveland. They've only had 1 company that has exited since 2004. So I think one of the key things, and this really gets back to kind of the pipeline and the ecosystem, underlying all of these efforts that's supported by government and foundation, I think ultimately if a community doesn't have successful companies that are attracting outside capital and allowing investors and entrepreneurs to make money, this thing all falls apart. So in Cleveland, it's taking us a while. I mean, it will remain to be seen if Jumpstart is ultimately successful. They have a lot of bets out there. They've had failures along the way, but these things take time. And again, 2000, they've been at it for 12 years, and they have only 1 exit at this point. Is there lack of success because of the pipeline? Is there lack of success because the people aren't picking the right deals? Is it just a matter of time? We, like you guys, have bet heavily on the healthcare sector. For those who work in healthcare, I mean, even, what's the company that got the Gates Foundation money this year? CuVec. I mean, so they still are pre-revenue, right? Very successful, attracting capital. Many of the companies in Cleveland, because of the time to market because of the regulatory situation. I mean, there's my app developer friend. Unlike a guy who's developing an app and can have the thing ready and revenue, I don't know if you have revenue yet, but and could sort of be quick to market, when you as a community are betting on the healthcare space like we have, many of these companies are not showing revenue early on, not because they're not making success along the way, but because the regulatory environment takes time. So many of Jumpstart's companies are in the healthcare space. You know, I talked at dinner with some folks about kind of my own university. This is a fund that we set up. Half the money came from the university, half the money came from government. These are direct investments into spin-offs, and I know that's something that's actively being worked on here. Research we have a lot of research that comes from the federal government. Traditional research is not necessarily being thought of, hey, what's the commercial application? So there's a lot of efforts that's happening in places like Tübingen and Cleveland where you're sort of focused on how do you commercialize this technology. So this is a fund set up by the university to invest in spin-off companies. And universities, I mean, for those that are students, and I got some bits and pieces of it today from some of the students that I talked to, I mean, universities can play a really big role in startup weekends, in gathering people together. I mean, they're often, I mean, what is Tübingen doing to support student-led startups? What is it doing to support spin-offs? Universities can be a really big hub, and obviously this is a huge university town to do some of that work. Okay. I want to just briefly talk about angel investing. So the definition of an angel investor is a high net worth individual, basically a rich individual that isn't necessarily a family member or knew you before, that would make an investment in a company. We really had, I think there's some similarities between Tübingen and Cleveland. We have a lot of wealthy people. Most of them would never invest in a startup. They were looking to deploy their money outside of Cleveland and not necessarily in startups. What we did at a state level is create incentives for the formation of angel funds. And the idea of an angel fund is like if tonight we said we're forming the Tübingen Angel Fund, you would actually write a check, we'd collect it, because Dirk's not busy enough, we'd put Dirk in charge of managing the fund, and he'd get a management fee, much like any venture capital fund. So there's incentives from the managers, and basically, entrepreneurs would come up, pitch the angel fund, and then the fund would do due diligence, and then the fund would make a decision on investing into a company. That's different than just angel networks. An angel network could be, hey, we're all joining the Tübingen Angels. You know, our friend, you know, who's got our social entrepreneurship university idea would come up, and we'd sort of say, hey, maybe we'd write a check, maybe we wouldn't. An angel fund sort of adds an additional level of commitment. In Ohio, the management fees for the angel funds are subsidized by government. And there's also a matching fund from government. So investor funds that go into the angel investor money that goes into angel funds are matched, not one-to-one, but there's a match that's involved from state government as well. The other thing that we had, and I think you guys had this as well and it expired, we had a tax credit for qualified angel investments that actually has just gone away. So again, you know, I know, particularly from my last trip, you know, this topic of kind of the Mittelstand and other successful businesses that aren't traditionally investing in startups seems to be an area where there's opportunity for increased education and getting more people involved in the ecosystem. The last thing I want to talk about is venture capital. So again, for folks that aren't familiar with venture capital and sort of how it works, you know, venture capitalists, and I run a venture capital fund. In some ways, it's not so different than being an entrepreneur. We pitch investors. So we have a thesis. My investment fund happens to be focused on my partner's based in Israel, Israeli medical device companies. So you pitch investors who could be high net worth individuals. It could be institutions like banks. In my case, the largest investor in my venture capital fund is something called the Ohio Capital Fund. That's a state government fund-to-fund, so we really didn't have a lot of venture capital activity in the state, and this fund was set up with the intention of bringing more venture capital funds to the state of Ohio, and then there's a commitment that we invest half their money in Ohio-based venture. I mean, there certainly seems to be a growing amount of venture capital in the region. I mean, I know others in the room have been able to bring in capital from strategic investors. I think the question for the community and for sort of policymakers, like something like the Ohio Capital Fund, interesting, this is a $150 million fund. Interestingly, it's not being renewed by our governor, who thinks that it's more corporate welfare, right? Is that the right role for, shouldn't the private sector take care of that itself? There's no right or wrong answers to any of these things, like in terms of, is this something that Ohio should be doing or shouldn't be doing? Is this something that Tübingen or the region should or shouldn't be doing? But what we've done in Ohio is really sort of experimented with a whole array of programs. We're sort of 10 years into our experiment. Entrepreneur Magazine hasn't re-ranked us. They don't do that ranking anymore, but there was actually a ranking that came out last week from a different magazine that puts Cleveland kind of in the middle of the pack. I mean, we sort of went from the worst place in America to do startups to clearly it's a better place for young people to be able to raise capital. It's hard for political leaders. One last sort of anecdote, and it is political season in the U.S., and I can talk all about politics if you want. I won't be here for the Bernie Sanders event next week, but it's very. Our original person that put in place, the governor who put in place the Ohio Third Frontier program, said, "We'll see the true success of this program after I'm out of office." I mean, that is a very difficult thing for any elected political leader to say, whether you be in Germany or the U.S. or any part of the world. Interestingly also that the person that took over him was a Democrat, the first guy was a Republican, and he kept it in place because it was a good program. I mean, that's also not the typical thing that happens in politics in the US. Usually you just get rid of the programs of the last person. But the business community and the Chamber of Commerce and others put pressure on the Democrat who came in to keep that program in place. And now we have a third governor who sort of kept it in place. So it can happen, and it sounds like there's things in this region that have been able to be put in place, because I sort of can't urge enough, and I think you heard it in the words of the people that I interviewed, that this is a decades-long process. And I think you'll see the true success of the work, and look forward to being in dialogue with other entrepreneurs here. I mean, my initial take just over dinner and spending the day is that there's a lot of the pieces in Tübingen that we've done in Cleveland, and you've been doing it for almost as long as we have, maybe not at the velocity, but I think the question will be, and it's nice to hear the stories of people going from 2 people to hundreds, and same with Dirk. So I think you're beginning to see some of these really nice early success stories, and then I think the interesting question for the community, the universities, the political leaders is like, how do you keep focused on it so that it continues to grow? So with that, here's how to find me. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Michael Goldberg. We'll now have the chance to discuss it with the local entrepreneurs. We'll set up our stage here a little bit. To you, Nadine Antic, and Dirk Biskup may not need much of an introduction here, but I enjoy introducing them to highlight some of their achievements. Nadine Antic is the managing director of both GlobalFlow and the Korntal GmbH. Together with her fellow student, CeGaT GmbH, she founded GlobalFlow in 2012, straight out of the university. The goal was to develop a technology to process and transform biogenic waste into high-quality products. And they wanted to make sure that they were actually upcycling rather than just recycling or down recycling. I met her first when we talked about an example of that from the US, and later on I was told, well, Nadine Antic does this in the region. So it's a very impressive idea and project, and has been received numerous awards and recognition of her work. We're curious on the experiences of starting up the process here in the region, and now starting the second startup, spinning it out of the first company. It's going to be something that we're interested in. Nadine, welcome to the podium, and welcome also, and at this, you might give a hand. And also welcome to Dirk Biskup. He is the co-founder of CeGaT GmbH, one of the large companies here, biotech companies. It's a center for genomics and transcriptomics. And the background of this is, as changes in genetic materials can cause serious diseases, CeGaT's top priority is to identify disease-causing mutations in patients, which involves patient and family consultation to examination, genetic testing, and the creation of medical reports, so the whole process of getting to know what the problem might be, the health problem. Dirk Biskup has first worked at the university. He's graduated from the University of Hamburg, has worked in Bielefeld, and then went on to be senior director at Bertelsmann, where he was busy with merger and acquisitions, so hasn't been an entrepreneur from the start, but working within big companies. And he also worked in the US as the CFO of Berryville Graphics, the largest single printing location in the US, and was also the European CFO of AEG Electric Tool Division, but then quit to focus full-time on the work with CeGaT, which he founded with his wife. And so since July 2012, he's fully here in Tübingen working on making this a success. CeGaT has also received numerous awards. I like the comment on one of those. They were awarded the Ernst & Young Competition Entrepreneur of the Year Award in 2013 in the category Startup. Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year is the world's most prestigious business award for entrepreneurs. And they commented on their website, Saskia Biskup and Dirk Biskup are very happy about this triumph. So that was all this. Welcome tonight, and please join the others on the podium. Welcome. Now, we've heard most of us are not entrepreneurs, so before we focus on the ecosystem of a good economic culture, startup culture, let's focus a little more on what it means to be an entrepreneur to you. I mean, how do you explain this to your parents, to yourself maybe? Is this something you always dreamed of? What does it mean to be an entrepreneur for you? Nadine.
Well, I started at a big company. Is it working? Hello, hello? Yeah. Okay. No? Well, I worked at a big company during my studies, and then I decided it's, well, boring, and I and I couldn't get on the topics I wanted, and I always had a dream to build something up, and it was just not possible to do that within those companies. So during my studies, there was this class about writing a business plan, and I just found out that I have to have a business plan to get some money from the bank to start my own business. So this is where I got seriously in touch with becoming an entrepreneur, and then I started to do my business, like the environmental consulting. And my parents were like, are you sure you want to leave this safe company and the safe job and you have everything we dreamed of? And I was like, yeah, I can come back because I've gotten good education, and I think, well, the risk is low because I only spent a couple of €1,000. Other guys are buying some cars maybe. So yeah, they thought it might be a bit risky, and then I founded the second company with worms, and then they thought I might be crazy, but yeah, at the end it's great to build something up. It's really exhausting, especially in the moment, but yeah, it's cool, and I really love that, and I really love my team. It's just cool to build something up, yeah.
So it's boring to be in safety, but it's exciting and exhausting to build something up. Is that an experience you share?
Does it work? Yes, sounds like. Okay, perfect. Yeah, same here. My dad is a judge and my mother's a teacher, so it's not exactly a entrepreneurial background. And well, as you introduced me, I used to work in huge companies, and I had a comparatively safe job. And when I discussed with my parents that we could start a company and take up a loan and go into a risk, I mean, the first comment they made is kind of, well, if you really fuck that up, you're going to live from Social Security. Do you really want to do that? So there's a typical skepticism, probably in many German families, probably in Germany, probably more in Germany than in the US, that definitely exists.
Is that true for you? I mean, it seems you were, as a young high school student, you dreamed of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think some of it's family. I mean, I actually came from a family of entrepreneurs, so I had some role models. And, you know, even from a young age, I think my dad was always like, you never want to work for somebody else. And, I mean, I did the more traditional, actually, Dirk and I were talking, we actually sort of overlapped in Internet 1.0. I was at AOL when he was at Bertelsmann. And, I mean, I learned a lot. I mean, but I think it got to a certain point, and I think, whether it's the three of us up here and there may be others in the room where you're just like, I want to try to do it myself. And so, yeah, I think I hit a point where I didn't want to work for somebody else, and maybe that was the trigger to do some of this work.
Now, you've seen business culture in many countries. You're also get people who get to ask you questions from their background. Is there any country where you would love to be an entrepreneur? Now, are you happy you're an entrepreneur in Cleveland, Ohio, not in Silicon Valley, or?
Dangerous. It's being recorded, right? You know, it's interesting. I mean, I must admit, when I go to San Francisco, I mean, there is something about San Francisco. I mean, it was like the person who mentioned the ecosystem. I mean, they've got a lot of the right elements out there, and you know, it is fun. I think as kind of underdog, you know, whether Tübingen or Cleveland is kind of these underdog cities, like, because there's talent. And, you know, it sounds like you guys have been able to attract talent on your teams to sort of build it. You know, I've found it really inspiring to work. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned, I lived 3 years in South Africa doing development work. And this MOOC experience, I mean, I'm heading to Kosovo, I was in Macedonia. I spent 5 weeks in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. I mean, talk about the challenges that folks face. And it's really inspiring to see people from around the world. I think particularly in markets that lack the kind of things we all take for granted here. We have infrastructure, we have governments that work, we have governments that are supportive. So I still like being in Cleveland, you know, except for the winters. But I've really enjoyed the ability to travel and meet other entrepreneurs and sort of get inspired by them. I think the other interesting thing was, and even today we had an interesting discussion, there was a woman who was originally from southern China who lives in Tübingen, and just like these linkages that, I mean, markets, I mean, I don't know what kind of markets you're looking at, whether it's sort of German, European, regional, the world. I mean, we all have the ability to connect in very different ways than entrepreneurs did 5-10 years ago via in-person tools, online tools, social tools. So it's fun to engage. I mean, I'm really fortunate now because I get to travel.
Mr. Biskup, you've seen both. You've seen the US, you've seen Germany. Would you rather be an entrepreneur in the US, or are you doing just fine here? I mean, is this, you know, something of a temptation, you know, to think of Silicon Valley, or?
Well, that's a difficult question. I love the US, and at the same time, I'm very, very German. Actually, I was planning to start a business in the US while I lived there, together with a friend of mine. We were looking at steel business, so nothing to do with biotech. We decided not to do it, but it was kind of tempting, and it was kind of overall more easy approach to talk to people, to network, to get more information. Yeah. I love New York as a city. My background is media industry. So starting a media business in New York is definitely tempting. But overall, I think I'm German.
It's easier to talk to people. What about the risk involved? I mean, it seems to me, you know, from rather not, well, I've lived 2 years in the US. I mean, failure is an option. You know, it's okay to fail. Whereas in Germany, you know, you fail, you're sort of out of the system. You know, people look down and say, well, that's a fail. I mean, is there a different culture to value risks or failure differently, or how's that like? What's your experience?
Oh, big time, yes, definitely. Which is probably the biggest thing hindering Germany investing intensively in venture capital or in startup companies through venture capital. I mean, there's a lot of money in Germany, no doubt. There's more money in the US, but comparatively, there's a lot of money in Germany too. But the investments in startup companies, the risk capital, that is such a small fraction compared to the US. and the willingness to invest. And this has to do something with the acceptance of failure. I'm convinced. If that would be higher, people would be more willing to invest in startup companies. More people would be willing to take a risk to start a company and so on. From my perspective, this is the biggest difference between the US and Germany, the acceptance of failure. And I'm not an exception myself. So if I get a CV from somebody and I see, well, he was running that company and that failed, I take that critical, and then I'm thinking, well, you should be doing that, but it's kind of seems to be German genetics.
Is that your impression as well? I mean, would you love to be in the US rather than Germany precisely for that reason, or are you just fine here?
Well, with the environmental consulting, we're doing it for big plants, so I think the region here was just perfect for us. We have this big companies, but owned by the founders, most of them, like Rittersport or Eisenmann.
Family businesses, family-owned
family-owned,
enterprises.
And they were our first customers, so we had the chance as a startup to consult those big companies. I'm not sure if that would have been possible somewhere else, especially because we have so many of those companies around. So, yeah, we need plants and we need some material flows, and therefore this region is just perfect for us.
What's your outside perspective? If you look to Germany, I mean, it's ranked highly in some fields. Quality of living is good, but I mean, would you love? Are you dying to invest in or do business in Germany?
Oh, just dying? No. Yeah, it's. I like it. I mean, it's a big market. Germany. Too many. Hey, you got. I mean, what's the population? 80 million.
The ballpark.
And growing. You've got regional opportunity. I mean, it's so interesting kind of being in other parts of Europe where they're looking north. I mean, at least where I've been on this trip, they're sort of looking north to you, kind of with envy. So, I mean, I think German certainly is the envy of the region. And, the ability to build a global company from here as well. I mean, I've met a number of folks, including some in the room that have gotten kind of feet on other sides of the world. And frankly, I think, many Americans, we don't have the experience in sort of working in international. I have been fortunate to do that, but I think you all grow up in a very, at least for those that have been, that are sort of worked outside of Germany, not just in the U.S. but other parts of Europe. I mean, I'm very impressed by kind of the ability for Germans that I've met to kind of interact outside of the country. So yeah, I think there's a lot to like here, and I can see why. Whether it's sort of young entrepreneurs or sort of folks involved in sort of government are putting resources to grow things here, because I think there's a great base to grow from.
Ms. Antic already reminded us of the local entrepreneurs here, the Mittelstand, right? The German Mittelstand. And would it be correct to say, well, Germany is more of a Mittelstand culture and the US is more of an entrepreneurial startup culture? What is it with the Mittelstand in the US? Do they have strong Mittelstand, or it seems to be,
I think they have different characteristics. You guys can sort of chime in, but I project out. I know the definition of Mittelstand in terms of the kind of companies they do may not necessarily so cleanly apply to the US, but I think of, when we're talking about angel investing, people that are wealthy, maybe that have their own business, irregardless if it's a whatever kind of business it is, that they're not interested in deploying capital. And these guys are, some of our sort of young, we had a really interesting conversation this afternoon with some students and somebody that's more of an angel investor. And how do you bridge that gap? But I think that gap exists all over the world. So while the Mittelstand, from an outsider looking in, maybe there's a unique sort of German piece to it, I actually think that challenge to kind of unlock wealth from individuals who aren't necessarily deploying capital in the startup world. We have that same problem in Cleveland. Silicon Valley doesn't seem to have that problem, but we certainly, I think many parts of the US and many parts of the world have that problem.
Before we go into more detail about the ecosystem of a startup culture, let me test one more stereotype, and that is, I was surprised. You think the US is this free market economy, and eat or be eaten. You know, you got to be competitive, and here we hear all about, you know, government stepping in and subsidizing. You say, well, there's no right answer or wrong answer. You know, we would ask the typical German, you know, me yesterday, I would say, well, of course, you know, Americans are against government subsidies. I mean, is that, you know, a specialty of Cleveland now, or, you know, is it more of a competitive market in general in the US? I mean, you have seen both. I mean, I thought the competitiveness was harder, yet you're also forgiven failures more easily. I mean, what are differences between the business culture in the US and Germany? What's your impression?
Oh wow, that's a big question. For me, it's not only a difference in business culture, but I really had to learn that Germans and Americans are really different, big time, in many small things, but overall they are different. Mm-hmm. Not in a negative way at all, but they are different and they act different and feel different and so on. And from the perspective I had, working in a huge company in the US, I felt that the business culture is more brutal in the US and more competitive overall. That might depend on more family business in Germany with more publicly traded business in the US. I don't know what the answer to that is. Please step in if you disagree. But that is my overall take of the difference in these two countries. Mm-hmm. But that does not conflict with the fact that there's a funding from governmental to help startup companies. I think that is a economical decision to doing something like that. Yeah, overall it creates jobs. It might create taxes later on. It is good for the community and so on. So it might make sense from an economical point of view, disregarding any brutality that still exists in the business world.
It makes good sense. What about, do you know the American business culture? Maybe would you love to expand to the US?
I never worked in America. I just worked in Canada. So.
Just worked in Canada? Well, that isn't that the better half of
our little brother.
And how was Canada like? Or is there a difference between?
Well, I did some work and travel there, and I was younger, so, and I just found it like. If you have a lot of money, if you get a good education, you get a good job. That's a different, because I met a lot of brilliant people and they couldn't get any good job. They had to do graveyards in like a donut shop or something, just because they didn't get any money for education. So I think it's a totally different system. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, just the one comment I was thinking about with on kind of the role of government, and you know, you use the word subsidization, which, you know, and you can characterize government's intervention like that or in sort of any way. I think when things aren't working fluidly, and it's just even Silicon Valley, which at this point has this, you know, kind of the envy, everybody envies their ecosystem. I mean, government has played a role, so. And not everybody in Cleveland sort of agree. I mean, obviously there's people that sort of, and we'll see what happens in the fall, kind of smaller government versus bigger government and the role of government. But, you know, I think job creation, job opportunities, and whether it's like, you know, people like us sort of creating new companies and jobs, or sort of, you know, students looking for jobs. I mean, this government intervention, I mean, and we talked, I don't know if you caught it in the MOOC, I mean, the woman who worked for one of the NGOs, it's sort of like, when do you kind of lessen the intervention? I mean, I have another guy who I interviewed in the MOOC, he talks about like an artificial reef. So like in Silicon Valley, it's like the perfect coral reef. You got the fish swimming and the food, it's like, all great, right? Like in Tübingen and Cleveland, like you've had to, through local programs and regional programs and even some federal programs, you've had to kind of like insert these artificial, whether you call it subsidizations or whatever it is, and then, you know, we're saying this takes a long time, and then when do you pull this stuff out? So it's a challenge. I mean, and again, I think regardless of your philosophy on kind of the role of government and big government versus small government.
Do you have an impression of entrepreneurial partners? I mean, you know, it's one thing to be an entrepreneur in the sense of, you know, you're building up a business, right? But entrepreneurial thinking is not, you know, an exclusive domain of the business sector. I mean, there might be entrepreneurial people in government. Do you have such partners? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want, like the stuff that we've been doing in Cleveland, I think is pretty creative, and actually a lot of it may fail, and you have to take risks. So I think this spirit, you know, entrepreneurial mindset, and you could be at an NGO, you could be at a university. I mean, I think if you merely kind of stick to what you've been doing in the past, you probably are setting yourself up for failure. But that's certainly, I mean, I work in a university setting now. I mean, I think others on the stage or on the audience have as well. I mean, it can be a very stifling place. Government is often a very challenging place where new entrepreneurial thinking or mindset sort of goes to die. I mean, you know.
What are the main three main characteristics of being entrepreneurial? What would that, you know, what's important if you would define
To
that?
answer, can I like this? I mean, it's interesting. I think this, like, not being afraid to try something new certainly is one. And because if you simply just kind of look backwards, I mean, history can be instructive, but I think, you know, how do you sort of pull from what others have done? Because I also don't find entrepreneurship has to be a brand new idea. I mean, you know, you can be very successful in business, in government, at a university by sort of picking and choosing what others have done and tweaking it and localizing it and making it your own. So I think sometimes at least in my view, there's a confusion of like, it has to be this sort of brand new, shiny idea. Oftentimes it's sort of taking the best of what others have done and sort of making it.
Resilience, would that be a second characteristic?
Sure.
What's resilience? It's a difficult word, so what would be resilience? Explain it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about grit. You know, the word, I mean, I think these guys certainly have it. It's like you've got, and even Gallup Corporation that does a lot of polling has been trying to poll on like entrepreneurial grit. I've heard the head of Gallup, and it's like, you know, how badly do you want it? I mean, you know, how are you going to deal with adversity and, you know, bounce back from the setbacks that you will clearly have along the way?
What are other characteristics of being an entrepreneur?
Go ahead.
Well, I think you have to be able to handle not enough sleep. You have to fight. You have to manage so many different things and not being afraid. I think it's like there's so much stuff unclear, and then something happens and everything breaks down and we have to change everything. So yeah, you have to be able to handle new situations and make the best out of it. And you always have to go on and move on and evaluate your business model, and you have to accept that what you're doing can be better if you change something. And
Ready to learn, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, ready to put yourself out there to really, you know, give it your best, your all, your sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. In that sense, I mean, would you say that you have entrepreneurial partners here with, you know, people from the administration on the state level or on the city level, you know, entrepreneurial government partners? Do you have those here? Or?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I would say so, yeah. Very, very flexible, very open-minded, very willing to think things through and be willing to accept changes and to try to help, even if it does not fit into a certain regulation. So overall, I would definitely say yes. Yeah, it's a good environment from a political and point of view. Yes. Not because of politics. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking administration and so on. I'm not trying to make a political statement. Yeah.
What about politics, though? I mean, they set the tone. I mean,
this question was obvious, wasn't it?
you sort of lobbied the ball, and you know, I thought.
Yeah, no. I mean, politics is playing a huge role, but overall they are playing more a role, like we call it Nachtwächterstaat, which is a little bit, I don't know what the translation is. It's an economical term from the 18th century, looking back. They should make the environment so that companies can grow, independent of the. I don't care if it is a left-wing or green or right-wing party, as long as they are not extreme. But if they accept that a certain growth in environment is necessary, I'm definitely fine with that.
And as long as they have good people in their administration.
These people usually don't change. The people that really do the work on the daily basis, they are not being changed. I'm not talking ministers. That is not our level we talk to.
Right.
Yeah, or mayors or any president.
They just represent the eternal administration, so to speak.
I'm talking the real administration. That's why I meant. I'm not talking politics. I'm really talking about the administration, the state administration, the people who talk about taxes and where can you build a building and how do we finance a TTR, for example. There's many people in the administration who are doing really a great job and who are really helpful.
You're saying they're part of the environment of entrepreneurs. Would you say there is an entrepreneurial community that sustains you, and who else would be part of that community? You know, besides people from the administration. I mean, do we have strong foundations, you know, that come in with grants, or who else would be in the German ecosystem? Who else would be a part of the entrepreneurial community?
Well, that's pretty much it.
So it's administration, no foundation?
I don't have too many networks I'm working with or any kind of entrepreneurial, I don't know, networks or meetings or so on, round tables.
When I started my business, I didn't even know the word entrepreneur. So I was never into this entrepreneurial networking thing or something. It just happened, and I just built up my network, but I never went out and said, yeah, the entrepreneurs are there and here and that. I was looking for networks that are important for us, and just went on.
Would you say you would benefit from, or it seems like we don't have the same kind of ecology then that you have. You explained in great detail. There are, people who give seed money or cultivate, what's coming from this, or there's venture funds, there's government, there's the leveraging of anchor institutions, I think you called it. So there's lots of factors that you pointed out. I mean, is that more than it seems to have that we have here in Germany?
But I mean, again, I think what's interesting, with the entrepreneurs on the stage is like, I mean, oftentimes, and some of this may be timing. I mean, if you guys were starting your companies today, and some of the things that are in place now, perhaps it would have been different, or if you were at university then. But also, like, I think this is, I mean, it's not so unusual that, like, even with the array of things that we're trying in Cleveland, that we'd hear a story just like yours. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't, you had your head down, you saw the opportunity, you built the team. There may or may not have been kind of things along the way. I think we are doing, and I think a lot of this starts at a student level, I'd say, at least in our community, and I see this also around the world. I mean, how many of you have participated in a startup weekend activity? Okay, so these ideas are like Startup Grind. Has anybody done Startup Grind? I mean, they're sort of similar. That one's sponsored by Google. I mean, you also have probably different than when these guys started. You got this array of larger corporates that are playing in the space. So there's Google for Entrepreneurs, Salesforce has an entrepreneur group. I've done some stuff with Microsoft. Entrepreneurship is pretty cool. I think it always is important for, and it doesn't really matter whether it's sort of government involvement, corporate involvement, like from an entrepreneur. This is what I actually try to do in my MOOC. I try to look through the eyes of the entrepreneur into the ecosystem. And many of the people, probably unlike you guys that I profile in my MOOC, had really benefited from it. So, an entrepreneur that I profiled who came out of our university, she was a grad student, a biomedical engineering grad student. I think she said like 90% of her early money that she raised for her business came from government. And then that was a catalyst. She ended up attracting venture capital. So, yeah, I think we've probably put a few more things in place. I think it's better for student-led entrepreneurship. We have more of these mixers. And again, maybe there's a cultural thing as well. I mean, maybe Americans go to this kind of stuff more than the German entrepreneurial community. I mean, sometimes people may get a little sick of them. I mean, particularly if you're an entrepreneur that haven't been able to like successfully build your business or to access capital, you're like, why do I keep going to these things? I'm not, it's not working for me. But I think we're trying. I mean, I think there's an emphasis. We also like do things like mentoring programs at Jumpstart. I mean, the same foundation that funded my MOOC, they put $1 million into a mentoring program. My guess is you guys have mentors that you acquired along the way. You didn't go through a formal program. You may be very well mentors to others without the benefit of a mentoring program. Why did Cleveland spend $1 million on a mentoring program? Well, we had a foundation, and they looked at this MIT model to do it. So I think, is that right or wrong?
Mentors, or does that play a role? As role models, so to speak, mentors.
Yeah, I have a lot of mentors.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's more like I met them somewhere, and it's just like.
It's not organized.
Yeah, and it's unorganized, and I get along with those guys. And
you find them, or they find you?
Well, actually, it's always like I meet them, we talk to each other, and mostly they're successful in their business, and one is for marketing and communication, the other one is for finance, and then I have somebody for my technical themes or topics. So. I took them and I get in with them into a discussion, and it ended up always with a mentoring. So yeah, I think it's fun for them to work with me. So yeah.
How about you? Do you have mentors?
Neither way, no. I didn't have mentors, and I haven't found any, and nobody found me.
Okay, so here's one out.
Until tonight.
No.
Until tonight, find this guy.
No application here.
It's not an application.
Yeah, right.
No, not too much from that end.
Uh-huh.
I mean, when I think back, I worked in private business. I didn't have a mentor, but I had people where I thought, okay, not this way. I mean, did you have those experiences as well, or seeing people who do it badly, like bad role models?
Yes, of course. Sure.
What about university? I mean, you found it straight out of university. A lot of the biotech companies here, including CeGaT and of course CureVac, are research-driven, and university research has been the base of really those companies. And how far is that well managed? I mean, is this coincidentally that it's biotech where it's growing out of, or could the university be a much stronger driver maybe in setting up the jump to business? Or what's your impression or your experience there, the role of universities?
Well, my impression is that overall the research activities in Germany at universities and other institutes are pretty good and delivering pretty good results. But there's a gap from turning these results into a business. Mm-hmm. Is that the role of the university? Frankly, I doubt it. Mm-hmm. There are universities that could do more, yes, but I don't think it's the responsibility of the university to really make this transition from the idea to money again, where people are willing to invest money into ideas, where companies are formed on.
So I would say, as I listen to you, I think that you would say that the main problem that we have is the lack of venture capital.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then let me take that for the last round, and then we'll open up for questions. One of the things is that I think your experience is how to make venture capital accessible to foreign countries. So suppose, Ms. Antic would like to expand to the US, no plans yet, but is there, what would be in for her if she did this? What would it need for her to get grants or to get some sort of investment?
Well, it's interesting. One thing, and I think I talked about it this afternoon with some folks, like when venture funds go out to raise capital to investors, we're usually, we have our own story and kind of what our thesis is. And, many US funds aren't set up to do international investing. Some are. Mine was set up with an eye towards Israel. The one area that I'm sort of bullish on, it's still very early, is crowdfunding. So for those of you who aren't familiar with crowdfunding, there's platforms, and it started off that was more like, the Pebble Watch, so people would sort of go on. It was like a sales channel, like Kickstarter, Indiegogo. the U.S. law changed. Actually, the bill was signed almost 2 years ago, but our Security and Exchange Commission just sort of promulgated all the regulations, and now there's equity-based crowdfunding. So I'm not saying you necessarily want to give up ownership of your company to people around the world, but there are new ways and new platforms to reach people. I mean, I don't know a ton about your business. I mean, it's an environmental consulting business.
Well, I have two businesses. One is an environmental consulting, and we take the garbage and make some fertilizer out of it.
Okay, so there's a social component.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting, so I think the social piece, and then, you know, the German diaspora. I mean, obviously there's a lot of Germans that are living outside of Germany. I think that diaspora investors, if you can use the crowdfunding platform, try it again. I'm looking at you guys, not even that you're necessarily looking for outside funding, but I remain pretty intrigued by using some of these social platforms and crowdfunding platforms to reach. I mean, it's not totally crazy that there's a German living in Cleveland or a German living in Singapore or a German living somewhere that like might be like, oh yeah, I'm from Tübingen, I went to your university, you know, that might have a connection, and maybe the social piece of what you're doing would resonate. I think venture capital, to do that, the way that funds are set up, it's actually it's very challenging. So I think it would be more what we're calling sort of business angels, kind of globally, or / kind of crowdfunding. It's still hard.
Is that an option, crowdfunding? I mean, in your line of business, would that be an option?
Never considered it, to be honest. Yeah.
Is he a typical company? I mean, it's a pretty, relying heavily on investments because it's research and.
I think he's too far along, right? I mean, I think in some ways, it's interesting, kind of like what type of investor you need at what point, and and if you're doing some kind of a new line.
Yeah, this is.
You are considering.
We're actually starting a crowdfunding on 21st of June.
Oh, you are?
So, yeah,
cool.
We're just preparing.
Which platform are you using?
Companisto.
Is that a German? Okay.
Yeah.
And here's your chance to pitch for this. I mean.
No.
How much are you trying to raise?
What's that?
How much are you trying to raise via crowdfunding?
600,000.
Okay.
And how would you do this? I mean, you choose a crowd sourcing.
Well, actually, they found us. They said, well, we see that you're doing a good business and you're pretty busy and there's so much stuff you can do. So show us your numbers and maybe we can put you on our platform. And actually, we had 3 platforms they were asking us, and then we decided that.
Great.
That's nice.
I'm glad I used this example of crowdfunding. It wasn't even set up this way. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then we decided we choose the one for lifestyle products, not the environmental technology one. And yeah, now we're preparing the movie and whatever.
Was that what you were shooting today? The video for the
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, because 2 businesses now to run. And, that's the thing.
And are you offering equity, or are you offering products?
Products.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so when are you going online with that?
21st of June.
Okay, I will be looking out for you at Facebook.
The name of the product is called Warmanizer.
What's Warmanizer?
Warmanizer is fertilizer made by worms. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, warmer. Okay.
Not what comes to mind if you had Bill Clinton as the president, but
Yeah, if you want to invest, yeah.
Cool.
Where do you get? I mean, not to be inquisitive, but how do you get your investment?
Well, so far we have financed it by ourselves when we started the business, and then we sold a share of CeGaT to B. Braun. By a capital increase, so B. Braun invested in CeGaT. I'm now at the point that we want to form a new company, and now we are looking the first time at venture capital money. Which is interesting because we talk to German venture capitalists at the moment and US venture capitalists, and it's a totally different approach.
And how far was the difference? What's the difference in this approach?
5 million to 100 million. Very simple. It's huge. It's huge. I mean, it's definitely huge. The German approach, even from venture capitalists, is way more cautious and business plan driven and proof of concept.
Why are you even talking to both? I mean, isn't it clear you're going to go for the 100 million?
What about valuation?
That is, well, you know, valuation of startup companies is.
But what's the difference between German valuation, a German venture capital approach on valuation, and the U.S. approach for valuation? Are you seeing a difference?
No, they are both using discounted cash flow models, of course.
Oh, but this is your current. Okay, I thought you were starting something.
Yeah, no, I'm starting something new, and I'm drawing up business plans for the new business.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And I'm trying to collect money for the first time, and so I'm talking.
I see. Okay.
I'm regularly in the U.S. and talking to venture capitalists there,
Okay.
and setting up clinical trials there, and doing the same thing here in Germany, and it's totally different from the perception of how you could collect money. I'm not saying I need 100 million. It's just like I presented the idea, and the first reaction was, well, that we can easily collect 100 million for that idea.
I'd like to have your idea.
And I said, well, okay, very nice. And yeah, in Germany, it took me way more convincing arguments to at least convince somebody to invest 5 million.
Can you tell the Germans and say, look, now our American friends put 100 million on the table, so let's see what you have.
Oh no, I won't talk about that now. Definitely not. It's
we won't
just
talk
a different
about it
approach.
Unless you're watching on the live stream, right? Yeah, sorry. The German venture capitalists are loving the live stream tonight.
Well, if somebody has a check on 100 million,
right.
no, we just want to start a new business, and we have a nice idea, and of course, I will not talk about that here. But it's I mean, I need financing because it's slightly different to what CeGaT is doing. And collecting money is totally different. And that is, I think, the biggest difference between Germany and the US. It's always the same point. There's an idea, there's a transformation into business. Yeah, I've not even founded the company. I'm on the verge of founding that company. And it's a totally different approach and totally different willingness of taking a risk.
Okay. Any comment on that? Well, we thank you for your talk, your first round of talk here, and I'll open up the questions to the participants here. You've listened to and seen different approaches, the way we learn from how it is done in Cleveland, Ohio, how there's an ecological system set up for doing business, and we've compared that a little bit to Tübingen experiences, and especially in the perspective on funding, how do you get funds? What are questions that you would have or experiences that you'd like to share? I mean, you're all, in one way or the other, involved as observers or entrepreneurs yourself, or would love to be an entrepreneur. What are your questions? Darf Schneider.
A lot of the most